I have this particular delight in something I read from people who are called disability theologians, and they are a mixture of a couple of things. They are either people who are living with disabilities who are theologians, or they are theologians who have a particular interest in disability. Those that are disabled themselves have this brilliant term for everybody that is not disabled, and it is the not yet disabled, or the temporarily able-bodied. And I suppose my first question is that, for you, how do you feel about the label disabled?
Yeah, so there was, you can help me with the history of all of this, how terminology gets used. The term disabled or disability, I think is a very appropriate term. And within the disability world, it's kind of the term that we prefer to use. There was a period of time, I don't know, anecdotally it feels like towards the end of the early 2000s into the 2010s, where other terms like differently abled and things were being used. And I remember hearing those and thinking like, I understand what's trying to be done. We're trying to be sensitive, like disabled sounds bad, but I remember, this was before like I was in disability anything, like I wasn't in the disability conversation, but I just remember feeling like kind of uncomfortable with it. Because I thought, I mean, what's wrong with the term? It's just like, it's what it is, you know? Well, now it's come back around where people who are disabled are saying, well, why is it such a bad thing to be disabled? It's such a bad thing that we can't even call it disability? Like you're trying to avoid the reality of our lives? Why are our lives so bad to you, you know? And so the term disability has actually been brought back around to be kind of the term that's being used because it acknowledges, look, I have a different body than you do, and there's nothing wrong with that. So why are we avoiding the term? So I like the word disabled. Different. If you need the word differently abled, I'm not a word police. Whatever term you need to use, but disabled I think is a great word. So, yeah.
And the rest of you are the temporarily able-bodied.
Yeah, because I love that you brought that point out. It comes for all of us, whether it's through age or it's through an accident. This might be the stat for America. I don't think it's a global stat. So in America, I think 25% of the population is disabled. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I haven't looked at these in a while. So we're the largest minority group in the world, and we're the only minority group that you can join at any time. Right? So just keep that in mind.
That's great. I think body has a lot to do with it, and that's something that I reflect on. I try to think about theologically and on behalf of those that I love who have experienced disability. How has your sense of body changed since the accident?
Yeah, so this is a question that you're going to get a whole range of answers from depending on the disability. I was fascinated when I first started hearing people in wheelchairs talk about how they experience their wheelchair as like not a separate part of themselves, but actually as part of their bodily experience, which can sound strange. But when you've been in a chair for a number of years, you start to understand what that means, where the flow of the chair over a hill or as it goes up a curve, you really begin to experience that. It's almost like trying to think back to my able-bodied years. It's almost like how, I don't think I can think of a parallel on the spot. But yeah, your wheelchair or the device that you use to get around is very much becomes a part of your lived experience. I mean, I'm always in this thing, you know, so I don't really think of, when I see a floor, I think of how would wheels go over that floor, you know? You think of how would feet experience this floor, you know? It's like, what does someone who's walking think about or watch out for when they're going over a floor? You know, maybe not as much as I do, but when I'm seeing this floor, I see it from as a lived experience of wheels, you know? It even affects the way I drive. Mm-hmm. Like when I'm driving, it just feels more natural, like an extension of myself than it did when I was able-bodied. In this strange way that I really can't communicate. So the bodily experience the embodied humanity of my lived experience is one on wheels, and that changes a lot, you know. And it is something hard to put in words. So maybe if you've heard testimony, you could help me out.
It's very helpful, and the trend around here is barefoot shoes, and I think you feel everything you're walking on in those, and I think it's that.
Sure. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, that's ergonomic. It's part of who you are and how you go through the world. And,
exactly.
You know,
I see cracks in concretes way more than any of you ever will, honestly, unless you're in a wheelchair in the future. I mean, it's just it changes the entire landscape of what you look at. So here's an example. So I play wheelchair rugby, and we are in different chairs when we're in wheelchair rugby, and they're set up to go fast. So when I get in my wheelchair rugby chair, I just feel like this unique sense of freedom, and like I've just like broken out into something. And the way I'm able to just fly around the court, slam into somebody if I want to, they just feel like this freedom. I don't know, so.
I wish there was kind of frontline design into disability equipment, you know. So much is very clunky. But if we put as much money into the design of disability work and mobility stuff, I think we'd be doing everybody a favour. What are some of the most important points that you think we should be thinking about when we start to discuss disabilities in church?
So I actually jotted some stuff down because I wanted to say these right. I think the first and most important one is the way that disability is used as a metaphor in inappropriate ways. So a lot of times when we think of disability, we think of there being like this pristine and perfect representation of what a human should be. So much so that, and maybe this will get into another question later, so much so that when we think about even the resurrected body, so think about this. When you think, oh, I can't wait to get to heaven because I'll have if you're a man, it's like 8-pack abs, and I'll be gorgeous, and I'll be 32, you know? Not even 33, 32. And I'll be able to sing. So all of those things right there, disability confronts those things, because most of those assumptions, maybe they're right. I mean, who knows? Maybe they're right. But probably all of those are assumptions more about what we prioritize as a Western culture, or what we prioritize as like the pristine body, rather than the prioritization of what Jesus prioritizes. Amen. So I think that's one of the first things. Let me think. Ask your question again, because I want to make sure I'm the right one.
The things that are for us to think about when we first start thinking about disability in church.
Okay. So, great. So, when I first entered the disability conversation, I actually went to say this first, it was a bit confusing for me at first, because even up to this point, so I've been disabled for 12 years, which means that most of my life was still lived able-bodied. So, when I became disabled, I actually avoided the disability conversation for a while because stigmas that I brought into the disability world, I didn't really want to associate with people with disabilities, because I was like, no, that's not who I am. I'm this thing over here. So forgive me, but just being honest. So it's only been the past few years that I've gotten into the disability justice conversation. And I remember it was like I had to figure out what was the holdup. Why was this confusing? And so I named it for myself. Like I'm about to say a line that kind of helped me, but this was for me, and maybe it'll be helpful for you. We have to move the conversation about disability from being one of a medical malady to being actually an issue of diversity. Okay, say that again. Move the conversation from being one of a medical issue, a medical malady, to being an issue of diversity. Here's what I mean. When you move the conversation to an issue of diversity, now we're thinking in terms of, there is something that this body of Christ is actually lacking or deficient in if we don't have these people with disabilities present, right? So when we think about disability in ministry, we need to be thinking, oh, actually, they need to be ministering to us as much as we're ministering to them. They need to be in the body of Christ here. And even, forgive me, even the us and them labeled assumes that there's the normative and the abnormal, and the normal is accepting in the abnormal, right? Which again, how do we even get to the point where we don't use those labels? That would be the goal, I guess. But that's the first level, I think. That this isn't, and it is a journey to get there. But this isn't just about, oh, there's bodies that are broken, and that's what's wrong. It's about people who have different lived experiences that can add to our congregations. So I think people with disabilities, when they're in our churches, have a prophetic presence. One of the things that people with disabilities confront is our tendency towards independence. Maybe you don't have it as much in Ireland, but I know in America, we are all about being independent. I don't need anybody, right? I can do it myself. Well, people with disabilities come into that space and they say, well, actually, I need other people. I'm dependent, and I'm actually interdependent. I've been in spaces with people, a room full of disabled people, and we're all like interdependent on each other, like we're helping each other out. I need other people need me, and that's great. It's actually good, because reality check, you're not as dependent as you think. You need people more than you realize. And in fact, the Western culture that is driving us towards dependence all the time is actually not healthy for the human spirit. And I think that people with disabilities, just as one example of a prophetic presence, can be a prophetic presence there. One last thing to answer this question. There are multiple models that you can view disability through. I've already kind of started to touch on it. One is the medical model of disability. So the medical model says there's something wrong with the body of this person, and that's why they're disabled. Then there's the social model. The social model says there's actually something wrong with the systems and structures around us that are keeping this person from being able to fully function in society, and that's why they're disabled. So here's an example, because that can be confusing. The medical model, well, let me back up. So let's say I get out of my car at a coffee shop, because I do drive. Let's say I get out of my car at a coffee shop, and I'm fully able, by the way, to get from my car into that coffee shop in my wheelchair. I'm fully able. Like I'm good with this wheelchair. But let's say I'm going from my car to the coffee shop, and suddenly I come across a curb, and there's no curb cut out. The medical model, well, okay, in that moment, I'm disabled. Right. The medical model would say, oh, there's something wrong with that person's body, and so they can't get over the curb because their body can't walk. And that's what's disabling them. That's the medical model. The social model would say, oh no, that person is fully able to get in that coffee shop, except there's a curb there. And that curb is causing them to be disabled. That curb has now disabled them. The social model would say, if we had a curb cut out, now this person is not disabled in the same way. Where I land, because you could go on an extreme of the medical model or an extreme of the social model, I land somewhere in the middle, honestly. I think, and I'll probably lean more towards the social model, but I think that there are certainly bodily lived experiences that correlate more to the medical model. Sometimes my body does things that, man, I really wish it didn't do, just to be honest. But more often than not, I could so overcome the circumstances, and I could live life like absolutely fine if we just change some systems and structures, if we had more accommodations in our churches, on our streets, in our schools, in the coffee shop that I really want to go to. I would be far less disabled if that was the case. So those two models are very helpful, I think, as you enter the conversation.
It's a really helpful way to explain it. Thanks.
Yep.
I'm particularly interested myself in the idea of Jesus' body and the idea of the collective body of Christ that we all get to be part of. And the fact that, as you brought out and some disability theologians brought out, the scars of the crucifixion were still on Jesus' body at the resurrection. And that tells us something, that Jesus' own bodily experience of trauma and terrible things was not eradicated in his resurrected body. And that the body of Christ that we are welcomed to be a part of isn't a super mighty Adonis type body. It's a body that went through crucifixion. It's a body that experienced poverty and all of these terrible, these life experiences, and you've used the word lived experiences that Jesus had, and our diverse bodily life is part of what comes into the body of Christ. Has your perspective on Jesus' bodily life experience changed?
Yes, absolutely. There's a kind of this seminal academic work that actually that was written around the 1990s. It was by a lady, Nancy Eastland, and it's titled "The Disabled God," which for some could be a striking title at first, but it's trying to nod to the fact, or really emphasize the fact, that the resurrected manifestation of the resurrected God carried disabilities. Like Jesus had scars still. He had holes that his disciples could put his hands into. Some theologians, not even disability theologians, some theologians say that the reason sometimes he wasn't recognized was because he was so marred still from the beatings and from maybe even his beard being pulled out. And so even the Eucharist is pointing us to the fact that God bore disabilities into and then even after his resurrection. So certainly that. Where I'm at with the topic of, because this brings up the question of healing and resurrection, where I'm at with that, I haven't fully formed all of my final thoughts with some of those things. I do believe that Jesus' resurrected body experienced a level of healing. I think it had to have, for him to even be able to walk down the road. But it still carried something, It still carried the burden of the cross, and I think that there's a unique cross that people with disabilities get to bear, and a unique connection with our King that not everybody knows very well. Yeah.
You mentioned Job, and I wonder if you have any other examples of biblical texts that you interpret differently now that you have lived life from a wheelchair, as you said it.
Yes. And I don't even know if I interpret them differently. I just see what they're actually saying, and I didn't see it before. So a great one. I love this example. I was just reading through it the other day, and I came across it again. I was like, wow. So Moses with God, he's at the burning bush. God's like, hey, I want you to go free my people. And he says, God, I don't talk very well. He's like, it's almost like he's saying, I have a stutter. And God doesn't say, no, you don't, you talk fine. God acknowledges that he does and still wants him to go and fulfill the task, but God accommodates for his disability. He says, I made the tongue and the ear, or whatever he says, and he does, and you would expect him to say, and I'll fix your tongue. But he doesn't. He says, I'll send someone to help you. This is a biblical example of accommodation for disability. Right there. In the Torah, at the very beginning. Another one that's great. This one's so good. Jacob, who wrestles with God, or whoever that was. Yeah, I guess it says he wrestled with the Lord. Yes. At the end of the wrestling match, so if you don't know the story, Jacob is walking along and he comes across it. It just says, at the very beginning of the text, it says, he came across a man and they wrestled all night long. And then at some point he realizes like he's wrestling with God. And he says, And Jacob wins the wrestling match, which I love that. He beats God in a wrestling match. He's holding God down, and God's like, I gotta go. He says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And so God, he ends up blessing him, but this is what God does. He touches the, what does it say? The sinew of his hip or thigh or something like that. And he throws out Jacob's hip. Is that what it is? Yeah. And so Jacob has a limp all the rest of his days. But that limp is connected with the covenantal blessing that God gives Jacob. And then the Jewish people don't eat the sinew or the hip bone of the Passover lamb for the rest of the history of Israel. But God gives him a disability, and that disability is connected with the covenantal blessing that he gives him. And it's like this beautiful picture of God giving him a limb as part of the blessing of the covenant. So I think that one is powerful, because it is not just that he experiences it, it's that God gives it to him as part of a reminder of the covenant. I mean, there's more we could go into, but those are two powerful ones, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. In terms of what you think the church, what does the church regularly glaringly miss about disability and about people in the body of Christ who live with disability?
Yeah. So, probably the first one to start with, I talked about those two models, the social and medical model. There's kind of a third model that I think we should go into. It's a little bit different. And it's the, oh shucks, I lost my word. It's getting late. Got jet lags. Oh, help me out.
Sociocultural one?
Say it again.
Sociocultural.
Benevolence. That's what I'm looking for. It's like a benevolence model. And the benevolence model is basically, it goes back to that us and them conversation, where the able-bodied church, which is the majority, sees himself as the benevolent many who see the poor disabled and say, oh, let's be benevolent to them out of the goodwill of our hearts. And what that does is it moves it from an issue of being a civil right that people with disabilities deserve as just humans, and it makes it an issue of, well, if we're feeling benevolent today, then we'll do the thing. But it also creates an us superior, them inferior that we're trying to help along. I think a better model is for us to level the playing field and say people with disabilities should be accommodated because they're human. They're our brothers and sisters. We're all brothers and sisters, not them. We're all brothers and sisters who all add to the body of Christ. We're all needed here. We all belong here. And because of that, we need to change the church if there's an issue of accessibility. But the benevolence model says it creates almost a class system of an us and a them. Another issue that is similar to that, throughout its history, the church has been at the forefront of helping people who are marginalized. I mean, just look at the hospitals. If you find a hospital, it has a Christian name on it, right? Find an orphanage, it has a Christian name on it. Why is that? It's because the people of God throughout history have imbibed the message of Jesus to help the poor and the marginalized and the suffering. However, there are right and wrong ways to do that. And one of the wrong ways that the church has done that is by segregationist ministry, where we've wanted to take on the command of Jesus to help the poor and the marginalized, and often people with disabilities have been the poor and the marginalized. But we've done it in a way that has said, we have our church over here with, the normal people or whatever. But over here, we'll set up the ministry for the disabled people. Well, we feel like we're checking the box, but what we've actually done is we've segregated those with disabilities from the normative life of the church, right? And that creates a lack or almost like an anemic life for the body, because remember, people with disabilities add to the life of the church. So the rest of the able-bodied people are over here, and they're not getting what the disabled people could bring to the life of the church. And then the disabled people are over here like, well, I'm not getting to receive what they're receiving over here, you know? So I understand there are times where certain disabilities need to be, all right, you can help me out with this one, because I'm not even sure how I feel about this. They need to be ministered to in a separate space. There are just times where that needs to happen. But I think we go to that far too often. Far too often. I believe there are people on the autism spectrum who need to be in the church. And they may disrupt the service that you're expecting the service to be. And I get that, and that's tough. But what if we had an ethic in our church where that's just okay? I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say?
I think that I think Ireland has a very good relationship with its disabled population, actually. I think that there are many of us, and we know and care for each other. Our services that are government provided are very positive in many ways. We live in one of the countries that serves people living with disabilities better than many other countries. Our church has a wonderful congregation of brothers and sisters with disabilities. My daughter is one of them, and she will scream her delight at a song the minute it comes on that she likes. And I feel that she provides a welcome to people. She sets a tone that this is not a super formal, uncomfortable place to be. You can be yourself. And I think that is exactly part of the ministering and the leading that you're talking about. Yeah. And I am ashamed to say that however well we are doing and welcome we are to our disabled brothers and sisters in church, we don't have a ramp. And so what the message of your capacity or our anticipation that you will lead us from the front, from the podium, is a silent message that we don't expect you to. Yeah. And that's our problem. That's the problem that a silent message that we send as a church because of our lack of physical accessibility.
I have a lot of experience with that one. The lack of representation of disabled people in leadership is a problem. And it's because we go back to, well, we want to find the strongest and the best looking and what we feel are the most talented to lead us, when really those with disability, again, they may not lead us in the ways that we're expecting, but man, we can add so much. Like I have experiences or I have perspectives on suffering, on the lived bodily experience that a lot of people don't have because I'm disabled. Now, you have perspectives that I don't have, So it goes both ways. Nobody's superior in this thing. But yes, not having a ramp onto the stage, it communicates something. It communicates that we don't expect you to be leading us, But really it goes back to this idea that, well, we just want to accommodate the majority, and somebody else can specialize in the disability ministry kind of thing. That's just not what we do here. And that's a problem. That's a problem. Because what that does is it says, oh, well, we don't have disabled people. Well, this is maybe not an issue as much in Ireland. What I see in the States is, oh, well, we don't have disabled people in our church, so we don't really need to do that. But if somebody comes along, then, we'll consider making some changes. But you know what's actually happening? What's actually happening is by you not making the accommodations is keeping us out. So let's go back to that stat. 25% of the American population is disabled. You go to a church in America, you say, okay, well then there should be roughly 25% of the congregation should be disabled people. And often it's not. And that's because for generations, churches have been constructed in such a way that it bars access. And ideas and messagings and systems of thought have barred access too. The word access is actually a more expansive word. It's not just about physical access. It's about relational access also. It's about what ideas or theologies is this church holding to that are barring access to the full life of the body for those who are disabled. I could go on about that.
So could I.